Hey guys, Cam here with Indie News Now, looking at the Emergencies Act and whether it was valid or not. Now, I am not a lawyer and this is not legal advice. However, looking at the definition of national emergency here, for the purpose of this act, the national emergency is an urgent and critical situation of a temporary nature that seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians and is of such proportions or nature as to exceed the capacity or authority of a province to deal with it. Now, Alberta and Windsor, both of those border issues were cleared before the invocation of the Emergencies Act, so they obviously did not need help with it, which goes to question whether Ottawa was an issue. However, it did not seriously endanger the lives, health, or safety of Canadians. The question as to whether there was a threat to the country via economic means was certainly pressed by Democrat politicians from the States, which were cited by some government officials here.
Okay. So this tweet would essentially be an example of that bring manufacturing back home sentiment.
Absolutely.
Mr. Comartin, would you have anything to add to that?
Well, just that this was her comments were the strongest that we had from any of the elected representatives. I think it reflected to some degree the passion she feels for her district, but it also reflects a certain level of ignorance in terms of the relationship, the treaty relationship we have between ourselves.
Another important thing here for the sense of a national emergency is that it cannot effectively be dealt with under any other law.
And you agree with me that that request, it doesn't require the Emergencies Act to be invoked. This is a thing that can be done. And it could have been done at any time between when the protest started in Ottawa to when it was asked, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And
it's used at any time.
Right, and for whatever reason, the RCMP in Ottawa never asked for all of these units, which could have easily been made available and sent to Ottawa to assist with resources. They never asked for them before the 15th, did they?
I was not aware of any requests at all before that. Yeah.
And you've watched some of this hearing. The biggest issue in Ottawa was resources.
In terms of the tow trucks, there were potentially accords under the Highway Traffic Act they could have looked to enforce with. In terms of creating an exclusionary zone for the protesters, this is where they were not allowing people into areas in Ottawa and near the bridges. This is potentially a breach of charter rights for protesting, which is also protected.
Donations to political causes are a form of freedom of expression as protected under Section 2B of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Were you aware of that?
I'm aware that the Charter protects the right to free expression.
Right. And were you aware that donations to a political cause have been interpreted and continue to be interpreted by the highest court as being part of freedom of expression? Were you aware of that?
Yeah. Look, the issue here, at least in my opinion, is not about donations because nobody acted.
Moving on to Section 4 here. This is important because nothing under the Act shall be construed or applied as to confer on the Governor and Council the power to make orders or regulations providing for the detention, imprisonment, or internment of Canadian citizens on the basis of race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, mental, physical disability. Now, what's important here seems to be the national origin, as I'd say the vast majority of protesters there were looking to be able to have their right to their own national identity and to evoke it the way they deem fit. And there were many religious groups looking for their right to peaceful assembly, which they believe has been infringed upon as well. So, if they were there for the sake of protesting their sense of national identity or religion, I'd say that they should not have been given powers via the governors and council to provide detention, imprisonment, or internment of any of these people, which certainly there was detention. we need to move on to the public order emergency, of course. When the governor and council believes on reasonable grounds that a public order emergency exists. Now, the declaration of a public order emergency means an emergency that arises from threats to the security of Canada. Threats to the security of Canada has the meaning under Section 2 of the CSIS Act here. If we go to the interpretation, the threats to the security of Canada, and all of the lawyers have asked these questions already to a number of the people who believed that Canada may be in danger, and it seemed none of them could provide much evidence in the way of any of these being true.
And you were also asked about the ability of border agents to turn away people who are coming for a known unlawful purpose, and they could do that if they knew about that, correct?
Before or after?
Before the emergency measures were.
Well, it wasn't an unlawful protest at that point in time, before the Emergencies Act, right?
Right.
Now, it's important because it also says, but does not include lawful advocacy, protest, or dissent, unless carried on in conjunction with any of the activities referred to in the paragraph.
You can agree that Parliament has given you no mandate to do that with respect to intelligence.
I don't agree with how you framed it.
Parliament? So
I don't agree with the basic premise of your challenge.
Well, here you go. Yes or no? Has Parliament, via statute, given you, the National Security Advisor and the Privy Council, authority to collect and then analyze intelligence?
The Foreign Intelligence and Assessment Group is a longstanding group that no, Parliament hasn't given it authority, but it exists and it continues.
Jody Thomas was selected to voice her support inside cabinet meetings before the evocation of the Emergencies Act.
Thank you.
Oh, just real quick, guys. Come on.
So far, it seems like the Emergencies Act was not a national emergency and did not pose, threats to the security of the country. What's more is that it seemed like a lot of these issues could be dealt with by themselves. And it's important to remember that protests can stay in any point in time for as long as they want. Occupation is a legitimate form of protest. Blockade is a legitimate form of protest. It has to endanger the country itself. For a bit of context, they tried to declare COVID a national emergency under the Emergencies Act, and the provinces weren't too interested in it. Now, here with this declaration of the Emergencies Act, the government did not even consult the provinces, kind of breezed past an attempt to veto it by the Conservatives, that is actually under the Act, something that they can do, and then managed to do everything they wanted to do underneath the Act before it even passed through the Senate. One of the arguments being put forward at this point in time is that the Emergency Act being used in this way could have pressured police to enforcement measures, which means that there was political influence in policing. This is Cam with Indie News Now. Have a good night.